To me, it's about the people that want to implement the technology for any number of reasons. But if you're from industry and you want to utilize this technology, you're going to find somebody either from your industry or from an adjacent industry that's doing something very similar with it.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 255. Where can we go to connect with the latest advancements in the drone industry? Today's guest has that answer. Brian Wynne is president and CEO of the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, or AUVSI, the world's largest nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of unmanned systems and robotics. AUVSI represents more than 7,500 members from more than 60 countries involved in the fields of government, industry, and academia. Its members work in the defense, civil, and commercial markets. Before joining AUVSI in 2015, Brian served for 10 years as president and CEO of the Electric Drive Transportation Association. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Brian talks about AUVSI, the upcoming Xponential 2020 and why we should attend, and he tells us what to look for in 2020 in the drone industry. But before we hear from Brian, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. So let's find out what to expect in 2020 in the drone industry with Brian Wynne of AUVSI. Now, typically I open my interviews by having my guests introduce themselves. But my recording software had a few glitches this week, and some of Brian's audio is garbled. So at times, I had to be a little creative in bridging the gaps. For example, Brian's introduction comes from an interview I did with him a couple of years ago. At other times, when the audio is hard to discern, I step in and summarize Brian's comments, sort of acting as a bridge. Hopefully, it's not too distracting. So with that, let's pick up the interview where I asked Brian to introduce himself.
Brian Wynne, President and CEO of the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. It's a fairly long-standing organization, as you're well aware, 45 years serving the unmanned systems and robotics community. And I consider myself to be the chief advocate here. So I have the great pleasure to serve the board, the members, and a staff of about 35.
Brian, can you tell us about the organization's membership?
We have very intentionally opened our membership to as broad an audience as we can because there's so many different folks that are looking to collaborate with one another. You know, you've got industry leaders that are incorporating this technology into their operations like, FedEx and UPS and Amazon. And you've got others that are bringing technology solutions by way of sensors and things that can detect and avoid objects in other aircraft and other vehicles. So it's as broad an audience as you could imagine.
From your perspective, what was the biggest story in 2019?
It's hard to pick one story that I would say was the biggest. The way I think about it is where we started 2019 was actually working on how to address what had occurred at Gatwick and then occurred shortly after. That was in the December timeframe of 2018, but then shortly after that at Newark Airport as well, which were drones that were interfering with operations at those airports in a very visible way and very disturbing way. And so this is obviously something that's completely unacceptable to our community. And I say nothing of aviation writ large and the airports that were affected and other airports that were concerned. I reached out to my good buddy Kevin Burke at Airports Council International North America and said, we need to work on this challenge together. And what emerged from that to start off the year was what we call the Blue Ribbon Task Force of experts from the aviation world and the security world. It was co-chaired by Michael Huerta, the former FAA administrator, and Deborah Flint, who is the CEO of Los Angeles Global Airports, so LAX, and some other really super folks that joined that group to highlight what these challenges were. And then I fast forward to the way we kind of ended the year in December of 2019 when the NPRM for remote identification came out. And I bookend 2019 that way because one of the primary things that everyone has been calling for, and our industry and our organization has been calling for years now, is for the FAA to hurry up and implement remote identification so that people that are on the ground can distinguish an authorized drone from one that could be a problem. So when I think of 2019, those are the things that really stand out in my mind.
In regard to the remote ID rule, how is AUVSI working to identify the strengths and the weaknesses?
Well, for starters, we have been collaborating with the FAA going all the way back years now to an aviation rulemaking committee. Actually, before that, we were asked to solicit ideas for the FAA high-level white papers. That was what resulted in the aviation rulemaking committee. So we have been working on this topic for quite a long time. Specific to your question, now there's a notice of proposed rulemaking that's been published. As I indicated, it was published in December of last year. We've had a technical committee reviewing that in depth, and they have been developing comments that are being reviewed by a policy committee that we have. So we're still finishing that. We have until March 2nd, I believe, when those comments are due. So I don't want to get too far out ahead of that process, but we're not starting completely from scratch on this. And whatever our comments are, I'm sure, like others that are putting comments in there, they're going to be taken very seriously by the FAA, and then we'll all wait to see what they come out with in terms of a final rule.
What did we learn at the end of 2019 that we didn't know at the start of the year?
I'm not sure I've got a super great answer for that. One of the things that's very clear to me, and it became even more clear in the course of 2019, is that the community that is embracing this technology, and I particularly focus on the air side of things right now, is the public safety community. And that, of course, is a very broad term. Public safety is everything from first responders like the emergency response folks and the search and rescue people to firefighters, and there are many stripes, including the wildland people, wildland firefighters, all the way over to police. They are really using this technology increasingly to keep us safer and to respond to difficult situations. So I think we have seen that community organize itself better.
At this point in the interview, Brian's audio became garbled as he talked about the big message
that has emerged for us over the course of some work that we did late 2018 in 2019, was that the community really is focusing on public acceptance, that is something that if the public isn't clear on the benefits of what this technology brings to society, then we are not going to be successful as a community.
So being aligned with the people who are dedicated to keeping us safe is
a good way to demonstrate the benefits of the technology. And frankly, the public safety community is very good at training. And so we like to hold them up increasingly to other industries to say, you can learn from these guys. You don't have to make it up on your own. There's a lot of very, very good practices that are coming to the fore and that we can all learn from each other.
And speaking of being able to learn from others, in May, AUVSI Xponential 2020 will be held in Boston. This is the premier event for AUVSI, providing a global platform for everything unmanned, from state-of-the-art systems and solutions to what's coming over the horizon in AI, 5G, and edge computing. More than 8,500 professionals will attend this event, which has been held annually for decades. Brian, how would you describe the evolution of Xponential?
For starters, the Xponential brand was actually launched in 2015, which was when I first started at AUVSI. So it was previously called Unmanned Systems. And part of the trend that was underway back then was that the event had been heavily military, and it was obviously the technology was starting to expand over into many commercial applications. So one of the things that we've been trying to do is create a platform where folks can learn from one another, whether they're from the military side or from the commercial side. And increasingly, I think that's been very, very successful. If you want to use a drone to inspect vertical infrastructure, then there are a lot of people that are doing that. You know, people that are inspecting cell towers can learn from the people who are inspecting windmills and things like that. The defense side tends to be a little bit more close hold on the way they talk about their use of the technology. But needless to say, to do surveillance and to do reconnaissance is not a whole lot different than some of the things that, say, emergency responders would have to do in the aftermath of a hurricane. So there's a lot of before and after kind of things that folks can learn from one another, and I've seen an expansion of that over the 5 years that I've been going to the show. This will be my 6th year, but I know there are people that this will be like their 37th year or something like that. So there, I just dated it for you.
What are the key highlights for this year's event?
The highlights for this show, I think, will be a very good maritime presence. Very excited about that. And increasingly, what we're seeing is that the domains are starting to overlap in terms of enabling technologies. As an example, the folks that are doing detect and avoid technologies are starting to learn from each other in different domains. So that's one of the trends that I see that will be highlighted this year. You're going to see more and more. It's about unmanned systems in multiple domains and how systems can be built that ultimately we hope the regulators will accept and start building regulatory frameworks around that look a little bit more like each other. And what I mean by that is that the regulatory framework for the maritime domain for ships has developed over centuries. Aviation, less so, right? We've got a little over 100 years of people flying aircraft, and that's a much newer regulatory regime. But that's a very strict regulatory regime with very high standards of safety, and that's very different than what we have for vehicles driving around that I'm looking down on, in a fairly complex intersection right outside my office. We hope ultimately that as each one of these kinds of vehicles in these different domains becomes more and more highly automated, that we'll learn from one another across those domains, and we'll be able to develop regulatory frameworks that start to raise the levels of safety so that rather than making cars, for example, safer in a crash, we'll make them so that they don't crash at all.
And isn't Drone Responders holding their Public Safety UAS Summit there?
Thank you for bringing that group up. That's a great example of a public safety community group. One of the leaders actually that is helping to aggregate that community so that people can learn from each other. And yes, they are one of our partners at the show.
What can you tell us about this year's program?
Well, we've got a fantastic keynote lineup. There's Bob Ballard, famous for finding the Titanic. He will be one of our keynote speakers. We've got Kathy Lanier, who's head of security for the NFL. She was one of the people on our Blue Ribbon Task Force. I know Kathy from when she was in Washington, D.C. as the police chief of Washington, D.C., and we worked together on that task force. And I can't wait to hear her perspective on how to make certain that this technology is implemented and executed the right way. We have Dr. Carol Lapointe coming, who I've known from when she was at the Pentagon working in the Navy. She is an MIT person who is now the co-leader of a group at the Institute for Assured Autonomy at the Applied Physics Lab, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. So it's just a fantastic lineup so far, and some other people being added. CEO of Boston Robotics is coming, Mark Revillard, et cetera. So that's one of the things I always like to highlight because I'm directly involved in making sure that we've got a really good balance of keynote speakers to attract folks and speak to the higher level questions that we're going to address.
Who should attend this event? I mean, who would get the greatest value?
To me, it's about the people that want to implement the technology for any number of reasons. But if you're from industry and you want to utilize this technology, you're going to find somebody either from your industry or from an adjacent industry that's doing something very similar with it. We're kind of getting beyond what we'd call pioneers these days.
There's also a great desire to go beyond
visual line of sight to, inspecting horizontal infrastructure over multiple miles. You're going to learn not only how people have been doing that in the integration pilot program, the IPP, but also how we're getting ready to start type certifying aircraft. The FAA is getting ready to start type certifying aircraft to do those sorts of things, how to integrate it into your business to increase safety and efficiency in your business model. Same thing with military folks, the commercial side, which is very well represented at this event now. The military tends to acquire technology in a different way than the commercial side. There are faster iterations for platforms, and we want our warfighters to benefit from that. And I've already touched on the civil side, the very extensive network of public safety people.
Let's talk about the industry. Does AUVSI have any current stats on the industry's growth?
The statistics are something that we've identified in our strategic plan that we are going to now start reaching out and collecting directly from the industry. For many years, people have been doing forecasts of the industry. We've done some of those forecasts as well. But there's real business being done out there now, and we want to start keeping score real time.
What are some of the opportunities for the industry as a whole?
The big opportunity is to take the lessons from the IPP, which is going to come to an end before the year is over, and start applying that on a more broad basis. Very recently, the FAA notified the community that they're going to start looking at how to type certify aircraft. I think it's Part 23 of the FAA regulations. And we know that that's important. The platform itself, what is the operation, et cetera. We need to start getting much more concrete on how we can fly beyond visual line of sight and do some of the more extended operations where the real value is going to be, and the ubiquity that we've talked about for many years. That's, I think, the opportunity now. We've had some very significant companies doing that. Wing has done it. UPS Flight Forward has been doing it. Amazon's been doing it. Who am I leaving out here? I'm leaving out somebody important. And, now we need to be able to take those examples, which have come off extremely well, and start extending them and getting them into regulations. The opportunity is to move beyond waivers and, onesie, twosie ways of doing things to actually say, here it is. This is what we're going to allow you to do. And here are the parameters in which you need to do it. And this is how your aircraft or your operations need to be able to operate within certain performance requirements. That's what I see as the opportunity that we're looking at in 2020. And obviously, one of the big barriers to all of that was not having a road identification. So, if we can get that knocked out and at the same time be moving in parallel with some of these other things, that will unlock a huge amount of value, similar to and even at a greater level than what we saw when Part 107 first came out about 4 years ago or so.
People tend to be impatient with the FAA and their timelines for rulemaking and adoption. What's your perspective?
I have the very good fortune of being on the Management Advisory Council, which is a fairly good group to see beyond what our interests are in the UAS world. And what's been clear to me and what I've tried to articulate to our community on more than one occasion is we're not the only new entrants into the airspace. Commercial space, which is also very complex, bringing greater complexity to the airspace, their cadence for launch and for all kinds of things is increasing. Supersonic, hypersonic, those technologies are coming back, et cetera. So the FAA has got a lot of good things that they want to do, and I think are really important to the competitiveness of aviation in this country, and that we're all supportive of as well. Because their primary brief is safety, they are, of course, they err on the side of caution, and they don't move as fast as we're typically used to moving in the world of technology innovation. That said, the scale at which we can expand things for smaller UAS, we can test out technologies much faster and scale them much quicker than has ever been done before in aviation. And I think if we can come to better ways of collaborating between industry and government, then we can move faster together. A good example of that is Lance. The beginnings of how I as an operator, very, very quickly and in an automated fashion, get an authorization to fly my aircraft and accomplish my mission. That's a good example of how the FAA has reached out and said, okay, let's partner with industry to get this done faster. And I think that's the beginning of what will become over time an approach that will accelerate us toward unmanned aircraft systems, traffic management, and also urban air mobility systems that are interoperable and work in collaboration with the existing air traffic control system. So, on the one hand, nothing moves fast enough for me. On the other hand, I recognize that there's an awful lot of things that need to get balanced in this equation, and we need to continue to bring value to the table with our regulators and also some measure of patience and understanding. And that's probably harder for me than most people.
And we also have to remember that the FAA operates under a lot of federal regulations. There's only so much that it can do within that framework.
Yeah, and they're not the only ones. They're not the only federal agency that has an interest in what's going on if we just talk about UAS alone. So, we have to be mindful of that, and we are mindful of that. I've got an opportunity coming up in the next couple of weeks to speak to people at the FBI, for example. Perfect example of an agency that likes our technology and is using our technology, but also has stuck a pin in a few items that they want to work with us on, like what do we do with errant drones and what do we do with drones that might be flown for nefarious purposes. So, they're not the only ones that have an interest in this, and we need to be mindful of that and have an open mind.
As a closing question, I asked Brian what he hoped to see accomplished in the next year. First on his list was the approval of remote ID, but in a way that does not impose huge cost burdens on the industry. It should also anticipate extended operations. It's important that communities feel a sense of confidence in being able to confirm a drone is authorized to fly in the airspace. He feels that will clamp down a great deal on the unease
that might be out there, particularly at the local level, and quite legitimately so. I'd also like to see this community, and I think we will see this, we're certainly playing for it at Xponential, talk in multi-domain across regulatory environments about what autonomy means, what highly automated means, and work with, say, the auto industry and the guys that make trucks and the people that operate ground robots in cities. How can we use this technology to more efficiently take advantage of the space that's out there, whether it's above our heads or on the roads or on our sidewalks, to deliver what seems to be an ever-increasing and almost endless number of things that we can now order online and have delivered to our door. These things are all related to me, and having a robust conversation about that and connecting the dots so that people can see, okay, there are some ways that we can work together to make our transportation system more efficient and cleaner. I think that will be very gratifying. And I think we are starting to see that conversation get much more robust in 2020. And then finally, taking advantage, as I indicated before, of the really good work that's been done in the IPP, the flying that's been done beyond visual line of sight and package delivery, and the beginnings of turning that into regulations that make it predictable for companies that want to deliver packages that way and deal with some of the last mile issues that are always out there and that there's a large economic incentive to solve. I think we can accomplish a lot of that in 2020 as well.
That's it for episode 255 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Brian Wynne of AUVSI. I want to thank Brian for taking the time to speak with me. I also want to thank you for bearing with the audio challenges in this episode. If you want to learn more about AUVSI or want to connect with Brian, check out the website at auvsi.org. If you want information on Xponential 220, go to xponential.org. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.